Hey gang, this is John Newton, Snap-on John 100. I'm back in my basement again. There's a huge blizzard outside, so you can't hear or see anything. So I thought I'd come downstairs and play a little bit in the cellar. What I started with is, this is a piece of pine. You can see it was one long piece, and I cut it and I split it off to form a hearth board, and this isn't splitting out very well at all. I want to make a spindle out of it, so I thought I'd get my axe out to help save the day. I was doing this batoning with a knife, and it just didn't work out. This is a Estwing Hatchet. I taped this with yellow so I wouldn't lose it. But I've had this axe, wow, I think I got this thing in 1970. This is my favorite axe. I have a Wetterling's small forest axe, I think it's called, and I also have a Gerber or Fish Scars small axe. This one's my favorite one. I'm going to try to just sort of thin this down without cutting myself. Seems to be working. This is really dried out. I don't typically like to use pine. I'm just going to try it and see how it works today. I collected this actually this fall. I hadn't done anything with it. I really like axes. I don't have a whole lot of experience with them. Okay, I can carve this down now. Work on a little more with this to thin it some. Okay, and while I'm at it, I will flatten my hearth out a little bit. Good. Okay. Let this side out. There. Should I put the cover back on it? This is a new cover. The original cover was lost a long time ago. Okay. I'm going to set up over in the chair so that my old knees won't have to barely concrete. This will be good. Now the knife I'm using is a Condor bush lore that I got on eBay for like $37 with free shipping. And I'll have to tell you, the fit and finish is phenomenal. The wood is beautiful. I think I would have rather gotten micarta scales, but I didn't realize it came that way until after I'd already ordered this one. But it was pretty sharp. I stropped it, and then it was shaving hairs, so it's incredibly sharp now. The steel is, I think, 1075, so I'm not sure what the Rockwell hardness of it is. If it's heat treated correctly, it'll still be fine. It just won't be one that throws sparks off the spine as well as like 1095. But for a starter knife, this is, I would much rather have this than a Mora. It's barely more expensive, and it's full tang, and the handle's unbelievably comfortable. And the other thing too, it comes in a leather sheath that is, because leather sheaths are expensive themselves. I couldn't believe it. I got all of that for $37, so I was really impressed. And it was also a German company that from the 1700s that moved to Ecuador, brought all their machines over, and so they've been making stuff over in Ecuador, so that's why they're so much cheaper, but it's still German technology. I don't know about the material or not, but the technology is German. So I will just go ahead and carve this out, which this thing is carving like no tomorrow. This is pine, but it's really going to town on it. Scandi grind is really excels in carving wood. I think, I'm not positive, but I think that was designed, that grind is kind of designed for woodwork, and it really does do a good job. So I'll try to just thin down a little bit. That's just about dandy. You almost have to be careful not to bite in too deep. I just wanted to thin the center middle of this thing where the string is going to ride. You don't want that. If anything, you'd rather have that sort of put a waist in it rather than having it the fattest part, because besides wandering around, it also slows the spindle for each revolution. It's not going as fast. Alright, so I'm going to I guess what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this end this pointed end. It's already kind of got a spot for it. I don't know if you can see how well this is cutting, but it's really doing a good job. Trying to stop every so often to make sure that I keep the point in the center of axis of rotation so you don't get wobbling. That's really important. And sometimes you've got a spindle that's not straight, and so you have to modify where that point is. It might not necessarily be in the center of most of where it looks like it's going to be best. It looks pretty good. Okay. That's good. Now this end I'm just going to make this a sharp taper. I just want to mention knife safety is always something you should always pay attention to, and make sure you always cut away from your hands. I know sometimes if you put your divot in the hearth board at one end of the stick or on one end of the board, it's hard to switch hands to hold it with the short side. So you want to typically start putting it closer to the center so you at least have some hand room. There you go. That's pretty good. What I was talking about with this is if you put the divot and where you're going to have the hole to burn it in down at one end, when you're cutting this way it's fine, but when you got to cut this way you're cutting towards your hand, and it's really hard there's nothing to hold on to, so it's better to put it back towards the center so when you flip it around you can hold on to it, because you don't want to ever cut towards yourself. So I'm going to flatten this area a little bit more. Now, I never have used pine much because of the resins in it, and I've had trouble before with it basically burnishing instead of drilling. So this is going to be an experiment. This was extremely dry, so I'm hoping this will work. Okay, so this one is narrow enough that I'm just going to I'm going to make the divot in the center of it. And so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to hold this up in the air so you can see I don't have the knife point. You don't want to have it like this or on your leg. Typically you want to put it up against a tree or on the ground, but so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to hold it in my hand. And you make sure you use the palm of your hand like this as opposed to this, because you could slip down onto the blade. So this way you're not going to. You can kind of rotate the wood. That's probably good enough. You can tilt it a little bit to make the hole a little bit bigger. Okay, that's pretty good. Now I'm going to burn this in. I'm going to give you a close-up of this. I really like this style. It's beautiful. It's just shaped sort of like a woodlore. I guess a woodlore clone. But for a starter, somebody's just getting involved, this is like a great crackerjack knife. And like I said before, the sheath is a really handsome, thick leather, nicely stitched sheath. And I know a lot of times the leather part is just as expensive as the knife materials. Okay, I'm going to be using the Deluxe bearing block that I designed that is still for sale. What I did was I just about, because of how few of them I was having made at a time, I priced myself out of, I think it was getting too expensive, so I committed to a lot more, so hopefully that won't be a mistake. I'm counting on you guys to make sure that that was not a mistake. I've been able to get these so that I can charge $24 for them instead of $28, so that's quite a bit better, but I had to commit to more pieces. So before I was just getting tiny piecemeal, and then like way earlier he was doing it like there was no cost for, because it was for scouts. Okay, now I'm going to burn this in. If you can see that, I'm going to put the mark about an inch from your shoe, right at your instep. That will put your hand up against your shin. That's why you put your foot there, because that will make it right there, and it makes it straight. Oh, I caught this little thing. All right. So now I'm ready to cut my notch. For this I'm going to be using a saw. This is a Leatherman Super Tool. This is the old one, the old style. So I'm going to start right exactly in the center of that black spot, and then I'm going to carefully carve that notch or saw it in there. Then I'll finish it up with a knife. Now, some people use their knife for the whole thing. I find it easier to use a saw for this part. Okay, so now I'm going to just chamfer the front edge a little bit. That allows for oxygen. Okay, now I'm going to finish this with my knife. This old style one, you had to bring another tool out. See, I brought another tool out to get the locking mechanism to unlock. That's how old this one is. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to continue this bevel. Now you see I'm switching hands. That's keeping me from cutting toward myself. And that's what I'm talking about, chamfering the front edge. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, there. Okay. Now I'm just going to come in and widen the notch. And now I find it much easier to do this work with a little thin bladed knife. But I was just, wanted to play with this one, so I'm doing the whole thing with this. But typically, this fine work inside the notch, I use a small, like a Swiss Army knife is what I like to use. Alright, now you want to make sure that the sides of the side walls are pretty smooth so that the dust doesn't catch anywhere and start hanging up and then forming way up high, because that'll choke off the air. Okay, let me set up and I'll try and see if I can get an ember with this. Piece of leather here. I really like using a piece of leather because it's stiff and it's warm. And by warm I mean it just not, you don't have to worry about it pulling any of the heat away from the system. Popped out. That hadn't happened to me in a long time. I'm going to try flipping it around so I got a little more control. Try that again. Oh, I see what's happening. The angle is actually tilted toward the edge of the wood, so I was drilling towards this way, so I'm going to have to hold it at an angle this way so it tries to keep it inside there. I got an ember, but I'm surprised because the dust is so light brown. This is a little harder, I think. Was way harder than Basswood. See how large an ember that is. I ground it down pretty far before I started really applying the speed. For me, speed is much more powerful than downward pressure for getting the heat, because it's an energy transfer, and energy is proportional to the square of the velocity, and I would say downward pressure is probably similar to mass. Not positive on that, but it makes sense to me anyway. So that's pine and pine. I'll try something else now. I'm going to try pine and basswood spindle. I misspoke. I'm going to try a basswood hearth board and the pine spindle, because you want to have the it's more important to have the hearth board to be the softer of the two if you're going to have two different woods. The reason for that is it doesn't really matter so much with my bearing blocks, but if you're using wood, which I use wood sometimes, the wood, now I'm going to be using the standard one. If you've got the harder the spindle, the easier it is to not chew up the tip of it with the wood. So that's why you want to use a harder spindle if you're using two different types of wood. In fact, if the wood is soft, I would use a different spindle and use the soft hearth board if I was using wood. Now this one's not married, it was already burned in with something else, but this is a harder spindle, so I didn't think I had to do it. Yeah, much easier. So pine worked with pine on pine, as long as you can find a dry piece, and pine on basswood. There's that one's pine on basswood. Okay, the last thing I want to play with is a fire piston, and a couple of days ago I charred some amadou. This is the trauma layer of a horsehoof fungus, and it grows a lot on beech trees, and it looks just like a horse's hoof. The very thin layer of orangey material underneath the outer hard crust is the part that's called amadou. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the true tender fungus. So I'm just going to carefully break a piece off. There's a little tiny piece. Hopefully that's not too big. And I'm going to put it in my fire piston. Oh, that is too big. Alright, hopefully that'll work. There we go. I guess it's a two-hander. You see it glowing? Here, let me blow on it. Okay. I'll also try using a flint and steel on it. Get that out of there. Okay. This fire piston is a Vulcan by Newmouth. Yeah, Newmouth Vulcan. You can get them going gear, I think is where I got this. Let me get my flint and steel kit. I put my flint and steel kit in this Anemone by Maxpedition so that I could have two pieces of flint. And I couldn't get two good-sized pieces, because my favorite piece of flint is pretty thick. I think what I'm going to try is just to put this on top. Well, let me see if I can throw a spark on it with my using the flint. Okay, got one on there. And this stuff is really flammable. So I got to cut that piece out because it's actually hard to put out. There it is. Can you see it? I can't tell. Here. There we go. Okay. And it's virtually almost impossible to put out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little playtime we've had. To recap, what I did is I made a bow drill set from a piece of pine, and I used made the spindle and the hearth board out of pine. Got an ember. It was a lot tougher than using basswood or poplar, but it did. I did get an ember. The wood was really light brown, which I was surprised. Then I switched and did a hearth board made out of basswood and the spindle made out of pine, and I got an ember just as fast as you can use with basswood. So that was a real good combination. That'd be a good combination to use also if you didn't have a good bearing block and you had to use a piece of wood, because the pine is a lot harder than the basswood, so you could bear down on the spindle without grinding up the that's what I found. If the wood is soft, it's better to use a harder spindle so that you're not grinding the tip up up in the bearing block. So that was the second one I did. And then I got out my Numoth Vulcan fire piston and used it with some charred amadou or horsehoof fungus. That is a phenomenal material. If you can get some of that, and horsehoof fungus, real easy to find. It's always, I found it a lot on beech trees, and not sure what other trees, but beech trees for sure, it's all over that. But it's really common in North America, and it looks just like a horse's hoof. Once you break it off and look at the back side of it, the very top of it, underneath that hard crust, is the orange amadou layer. So that's the layer that you want. So you want to kind of carefully cut away that hard crust, and then scrape the part underneath is has little, is like tubular, like little tubules all over, and then I think that's where it's sucking in air and nutrients and stuff from the bottom of it. Sort of like the gills on a mushroom. So anyway, I put that in a tin and charred it. Works phenomenal. It's a really dense, super hot coal that's hard to put out if you want to put it out, and so you have to cut the piece off and put that piece that's glowing into your bird's nest. And then the last thing I did is I took my my flint and steel, and this time I struck the steel with the flint. In doing so, that causes the sparks to go down, and I had a piece of charred amadou on a piece of wood underneath there, and I threw sparks down on it and caught a spark that way. I typically, when you're using char cloth, you put it on top, and then when you strike the steel with it, you can see this really works well. You have this edge at an angle upward, and you strike straight down, and that throws sparks on top of your flint where your char cloth is. So that's how you throw sparks up rather than down. Okay, this was my new steel that I got, that I painted red so that I wouldn't lose it. It's made out of 1095 high carbon steel, and I really like it a lot. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and I love getting your comments. We're all in this together to learn things, and I just love learning new information. So anybody that has comments that of things that they like to do, or they point out different ways that they do things, I'd love to hear about that. So until we meet again, God bless.